Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to Politics in a Pint again. I'm Maya Hermerding. I work over at the McCarthy Center. We're so happy to have our three guests here tonight. We have Samira with us, a student interviewer. She also works at the McCarthy Center. Jair here, interviewing again for us. And our guest in residency, Dr. Reed. He is from the University of Seattle and focuses on social justice issues. You can see that on the table. We have a couple pieces of paper and pencils. As you think of questions, go ahead and jot them down, hold them up. We'll have a McCarthy Center volunteer come around and bring them up to the table. Thank you all for coming and participating tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our guests.
Okay, so I'll just start by giving more of a background on our guest, Ed Reed. So Wilson Edward Reed was born and raised in Vicksburg, Mississippi on a family farm, was educated in a segregated school systems in a close-knit rural community. He moved to Seattle to be near family and friends and graduated from the University of Washington with a BA and MA in political science. Also, he earned a master's degree in criminal justice from the State University of New York, Albany. In 1995, he earned a PhD in political science at Northern Arizona University. Ed Reed has over 30 years of experience working with communities, police departments, and universities around issues of equity, social justice, poverty, and educational reform. Dr. Reed is a published author and community activist in Seattle. His book, The Politics of Community Policing, The Case of Seattle, was published in 1999, which is considered the leading review of the subject in law enforcement. He has used his book for the course Policing Seattle, which he helped to develop, and frequently lectures in the Seattle area on policing youth, diversity issues, poverty in America, and domestic violence, and presently teaches in the Global African Studies program at Seattle University. He's funny, engaging, and so far I hope he has enjoyed meeting some of our CSB SJU community while here.
Cool. So first again, I'd just like to thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you.
We're honored to have you. First, I'd just like to ask you to speak a little bit on, the history of the kind of conflict between law enforcement, the criminal justice system, and the Black community.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a dissertation in itself. My dear friend, Professor Matt Lindstrom, brother, said to me the other night, he says, geez, I never heard of some of these words you use, like paddy wagon. I never heard of some of these words that, yes, we're on a podcast. I'm on a podcast with a friend, Dr. Henry Richards, and we're chatting about the history of policing in the U.S. I guess I'll just throw out a couple of concepts and ideas to work with. Historically, policing has been about social control of various populations. And the enslaved population was, in fact, under social control. I don't know if people ever heard of black laws. There were laws passed by state legislatures during the enslavement period, sort of like apartheid, where you had to have a pass to be off of a plantation or the like. And so we had paddy wagons, we had people that were conscripted to go out and bring in runaways. So the history of the police department or police departments has been social control, the control of runaway populations, or the control of populations doing enslavement, segregation, and freedom.
All right, so kind of along that same line.
Hey, Jay, can you speak up?
Sorry, yeah, sorry. Kind of along that same line, can you kind of speak to, since you grew up, in the Jim Crow South, can you kind of speak to the kind of similarities and differences that you see between the police officers you encountered, down there in your childhood, and the police officers that you encounter now or may hear people encountering, things like that?
Well, I'll have to admit that I'm 67 years old, and I grew up in Dr. Lindstrom indicated to me, doing Jim Crow. So I grew up in a society where the lines were drawn legally. The church was segregated, the school was segregated, the community centers were segregated. I attended segregated YMCA. My public library was segregated. Every aspect of our social life was segregated. So growing up, I sort of knew my place. My parents knew our place, and our place was in that African American world. So the school I attended, first grade all the way through first year of college, was all African American. So I never interacted with whites or dominant society until I attended the University of Washington. Policing was tricky. Most of my early childhood development, the schools were, the police department was all white. There was once a point where there was an integration of the police department, and those black officers that were hired were basically hired to police African American and African American communities. So for many of us young people at the time growing up, when we saw the police officer, we thought, geez, I'm in trouble. Or when we saw the police officer, we would take out running thinking that something bad was going to happen. We didn't see them as our friend. So to protect and serve didn't mean too much for many of us. So generally speaking, my perceptions of the police growing up, they were people that were out to control the community that I lived in, that they were out to control me and my friends, and not many options on, not many protections. So I grew up outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi, moved into the city, attended Rosa A. Temple High School, which was named after an African-American woman, and the school was all segregated. We actually never saw police unless there was a conflict. So I never met Officer Friendly. I never knew Officer Friendly. I only knew an officer that came in once there was a social conflict or a criminal conflict. I do recall at one point my dad went to a place called a juke joint and got into a fight, and he got cut up pretty bad, and the next morning we were all getting ready to go to church, and he came home in the back of a police car and had a big bandage on the side of his face, and I felt so embarrassed, and I was like, oh God, look at my dad. And I think as a kid, you just say this is par for the course, and what did my dad do? To get cut up by this man, and he ended up with a scar, and that was my extent of my relationship with the police, of seeing my dad come home in that car, and I was like, wow, I don't want to have encounters where I'll ever have to be picked up by the police and brought home, especially on Sunday morning when we were supposed to be going to church, right? So I guess I kept thinking my dad ran into the wrong dude or something. But that was one of my crazy experiences. And I never think about it until I have to speak to people. I think one of the things I'd like to share is most of the experiences I had growing up in segregated society, I just put them in a safe place to be able to be a successful person. Is I just would experience stuff and just place it in a little place and just go on. And it's taken me years to develop something I'm calling from the Mississippi Delta to Seattle. Poor boy makes good, earns a PhD at, Northern Arizona University. I've been running away from this stuff for years, and now it's finally caught up with me that I'm retired and able to reflect backward on growing up in Mississippi. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
In regards to the police today and how they interact with
Oops, sorry. Yes.
Okay, So in regards to policing today and how they interact with the Black community, in cases like Mike Brown and Eric Gardner, how would you say that the actual actions of policing has changed? Is it too similar to how it was back then? Like, police get away with things, and like, would you really say things have changed on an exterior or internal institutional level?
Well, I think we need to look at departments that constantly face these problems. St. Louis, there are about 10 departments nationwide where they constantly have some of these problems. The police shootings don't take place all over the nation. They take place in about 10 cities nationwide. Ferguson, for instance, the African-American population is 67%. The police population is about 70 to 80% of Ferguson. So you had a situation there where there was a major imbalance, where there were few African-Americans on the police force, but there was a huge community out there of African-Americans in the population. So I think every city differs, but there are only about 10 cities where these shootings are actually taking place. And most of the research will show that African Americans and people of color are not getting these jobs in these police departments as these communities transform. Gentrification is pushing many of these populations out to the edge of the suburbs, and people are moving to places that they've never lived before. They're not living in St. Louis proper anymore. They're being pushed to a place called Ferguson. Very few jobs, service jobs, African Americans not getting the jobs in the tech fields. So what I do is look at something called high crime, low income neighborhoods. So some of these suburban areas, there are just very few jobs. The jobs are in the service industry, and the jobs are back in the big city of cities like St. Louis. I looked at a situation in the Midwest where there was a man with a car backfiring. And the car backfiring, and the police began a chase with this man. And the chase went on for about 20 minutes. And the man had an outstanding warrant. The woman had missed her appointment in the city. And the police thought that that somebody from the car was firing at the police department. This man, I think the woman ended up getting shot like 15 or 20 times, and an officer ended up on top of the car shooting down into the car, and the man was shot 20 times. This kind of stuff happens because of fear. There's the fear of the other. There's high segregation in our society, residential housing segregation. And I think that's what we need to look at, that there's a series of dynamics that are taking place in these communities where African Americans, poor African Americans, poorest of the poor feel put upon by the police. The police feel that poor African Americans hate them. So there's a crazy kind of dynamics going on where there are some African Americans that actually hate the police and the police hate them. The young man that was shot and killed by Michael Brown, the police officer indicated during the grand jury testimony he hated the community, he hated the black guys, and he hated black people. So this is not the kind of person that should have been on a police force. But what we find is word of mouth, where individuals are attracted into policing. I've said, and I continue to say, that cosmetologists have more training than police officers. The barber that's trimming your hair, it probably has more training than your police officer. So we're entrusting young people with limited social skills, no college, For instance, Seattle, the city of Seattle, individuals do not have to have college to become a police officer. In one of the wealthiest cities in the world, one of the most expensive cities to live in the world, you only have to have a high school degree to become a police officer. So many of these people, they are fearful, lack of social training, they've never taken a sociology class, they've grown up in communities that were residentially segregated, or they lived in communities in suburbs, and they are placed in a situation 6 to 8 months after being hired. They're given a car, a gun, and enormous responsibility to patrol high crime, low income neighborhoods. And I think you have to understand these dynamics. And another dynamic that I talk about is many people in low income, high crime neighborhoods feel over policed and underprotected. So some people feel, why would I call the police? Nothing good is going to come out of this. So if I call the police, something bad will happen. And that means there's lack of trust and respect for police. By and large, most police do a good job in communities. Let's say 90%. The problem we have is about 7% of police officers are involved in all of these shootings. Only a small percentage of police officers are involved in these shootings. Do people understand that? Not every police officer is out there wild, wild westing, right? Only a small percentage of officers are involved in those shootings. In Seattle, we had an officer that was involved in 4 shootings. So a small percentage of officers are involved in these shootings. I hope that's sort of clear. Yes. Sort of long response, but sorry.
No, that's fine. So what would you define as community policing or effective community policing to combat these social structures that exist?
Well, when I wrote my book, late 90s, there were about 60 of us that wrote books on community policing. And we basically argued that if departments did not move to some forms of community policing, if bad times sort of emerged, that would be a reactionary response. Community policing is really pretty basic. The police gets out of his or her car and establishes meaningful relationships with community people, okay? The officer gets out of his or her car and establishes pro-social relationships. Hi, how you doing? And there's a conversation going on. There's some kind of rapport going on, okay? It's sort of like the best professor is in the classroom talking to students, gaining feedback. The police officer gets out of his or her car and establishes that rapport. It's proactive, it's not reactive. The reacting police officer is reacting and chasing what we call 911 calls. The proactive officer is establishing a relationship. Hi there, how you doing? How are the kids? And this is totally possible to do. I had a sister that was a police officer in Detroit for 24 years, and she's indicated to me she did not pull a gun over a 24-year period. You have to feel confident in yourself. You have to feel good about yourself. You have to feel good about your community. Only 7 to 8% of people in a community are involved in criminal activity. Do people understand that? If you've got 100,000 people in a community, only 7 to 8% of those people are involved in criminal activity. Again, that corresponds to the numbers of the police officers that are involved in rogue policing. Only a few people are involved in criminal activity. Fear is higher than crime. People feel that our fear of crime is higher than actual crime. So we hear about an incident on the news, or we read about an incident, and you hear people say, wow, you wouldn't believe what happened. Well, that incident might not happen again for 6 weeks, but it's blown up. We hear about it. So crime is actually down. Criminal definitions are up. Definitions of what is criminal have increased by state legislatures. Again, police or execute the laws drawn up by legislatures. Police don't make these laws. Police are told by property owners and people that have money, go out and police these communities. And they are policing hotspots. They are policing data-driven spots where they are told there's street crime. Police are not involved in white-collar crime. I want people to understand that. I've had officers in my class that have been on the force for 30 years, and you'll say, have you ever effected a white-collar crime arrest? And I had one officer say, I have no idea I would effect a white-collar crime arrest. What is a white-collar crime arrest? It's a person with a suit on, right, that drives a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz. Okay, so they've never been involved in one of those arrests. Could those people be involved in criminal activity? Maybe, maybe not. But our perception of a criminal is a person with some saggy pants on, a person with a hoodie on, or a person that we've racialized in our minds, a person we've saw at the movies, a person that we see, that's a badass, or a person we see, he's sketchy. Ooh, run. So the police are involved in that same kind of cosmology where they see people they perceive of as criminogenic, bad actors, or the like. Thank you.
Okay, we have an audience question. How do we overcome the lack of trust between officers and citizens or combat fear, and how long do you think it will take to do so?
Whoa. Another dissertation. Wow.
I combined these two.
Wow. You combine these questions. Well, I need my glasses on. Read that again, please.
How should we combat fear, and how long do you think it will take, and how do we build the trust between officers and citizens?
Well, this morning I talked about, we hear people say, we need an education. My point is we need a quality education. We need courses that educate and inform us about what's going on in our society. We need to reduce some of the ill-informed fear that we have. So I think classes, I think some forms of diversity training, I think diversity in staffing, diversity of all kinds. But I think people have to walk in other people's shoes and say, how did this person end up here? How did this happen? In East Baltimore, 98% of the people that live in East Baltimore are African American, right? 90% of the police force are white males, right? Maybe 10 to 15% of the force is African American males and the like. One stat that stands out for me that I think would help in fear reduction and better relationships, 52% of the population is women. Women are less than 15% of police officers in the United States. I would say crying shame, crying shame. In Seattle, we have a woman police officer. The top 25 cities in the United States, I would guarantee you there are less than 5 women police officers. In the state of Washington, we have a woman, Sue Raw, over the Washington State Training Institute. She makes the argument, we need to demilitarize policing. We need to decriminalize these drugs, okay? So there's this idea. We visited the prison the other day, and 400 or 500 of those young men are in there for drug crimes, probably with a weapon and the like. We need better schooling, inner city schools, okay? I think inner city schools. I think many of our students, I found at Seattle University, 500 students per year would visit countries everywhere in the world, but they've never visited Memphis, they've never been to Jackson, Mississippi, and they have no idea where New Orleans is. But they've been to Paris. Wow, London is a wonderful place. And you're like, you ever been down to New Orleans? No, I really want to go down there. Maybe I could have some gumbo. And maybe that's the extent of our relationship, is we go to ethnic restaurants over in the neighborhood. one of my students, he said to me, Dr. Reed, I want to take my dad to a soul food restaurant. I said, why don't you go to Island Soul? He said, really? I think he went for the weekend, went over, and it was like, wow, I was afraid. Why is he afraid in that restaurant? So fear reduction starts with us. Peace starts with me in my heart. Not having this cosmology of fear in my heart, where I perceive of people as sketchy or criminal. Ooh, he's got baggy pants on. Ooh, I'm afraid. Reduce the fear, see the humanity of the other. Yes. More questions? Jeez, this is pretty interesting.
So, what effect do you think social media has on racism and racial profiling? And what can we do to combat these images and stereotypes?
Whoa. Read the first part again.
What effect do you think social media has on racism and racial profiling?
I've been told that African Americans and people of color seem to be the only people on Facebook talking about racism. For some reason, white people seem to be unwilling to talk about racism on social media because they don't want to be perceived of as racist. So black people, oh, there's all this stuff, ooh, racism. And true enough, there's some racism out there. The major problem is racism is structured in institutions. Institutional racism is real. There are very few people that are just out saying on social media, I'm a redneck and I love it, right? I think we have to have the discussion. And the question is, where are we going to have the discussion? If our schools are segregated, we have a school in Mississippi that's going to be named after President Barack Obama. That's 94% African American. They're changing the name from Jefferson Davis to Barack Obama. And I was reading this lady say, well, we should keep the name of Jefferson Davis. We should not change that name to President Barack Obama. You're like, geez, no white people over there anyway. Kiddo, let's get real here. Like, come on. How many people know anything about Jefferson Davis? Well, I grew up down the road from where he and his family grew up. And he told the black people, we're going to free you when slavery is over. And the black people kept waiting. After he died, they kept waiting. And guess what? The smart black people that had been running the plantation for 50 years got their wagons and horses and drove and went to a town called Mount Bow, Mississippi, and they created a community there for 50 years. A self-inclusive community of black people. Banks, lawyers, and the community still exists today. I think people have to search deep in their heart and interrogate their education. I met the man that wrote the book, Lies My Teacher Told Me. What I want to do is be the person that don't lie to young people. I think we need to say, like James Lowen said, lies my teacher told me. Are we, in fact, uneducated ourselves when we are trying to inform young people? Do we, in fact, not know some of the stuff that we should know about our history? And I think we're misinformed. We need to know what Jefferson Davis stood for. Why did it take 30 years for all these statues to go up? These statues were not put up right after slavery. They weren't put up until the 1920s and the 1930s. And now people have fell in love with these statues. Oh God, they're taking down Jefferson Davis. Get out of here, come on. What do you know about that man? He was the president of the Confederacy. I think we need to educate ourselves about a lot of this stuff. What I found that worked for me, I would take classes, but I would read a separate book every week. I would read 2 or 3 books a week to educate myself. I learned a lot in the classroom, but most of what I learned was out in the community and reading extra books for fun.
Okay, I'm gonna take this conversation to a more gendered aspect. So how does intersectionality affect your research when it comes to female police officers? Do black female police officers have a less ranking or like white female police officers. How does their policing affect the community in comparison to white male police officers?
Well, I had two students I had do some independent research with me on policing in the Seattle Police Department, and we published it in our international journal. I think what we found is African American men seem to have had access to the police department before even white women. And then there was a drizzle of white women and then African American women. What women face is lack of child care as they move along in police department, lack of family care leave support. So for women that are interested in policing, there's this idea, and many men held this, I don't think they hold it today, is maybe this is a dangerous job, and maybe women shouldn't be police officers, that this is a man's job. Well, most of the stats tend to show that the job is really not that dangerous. There are some really dangerous jobs out there, like working in Alaska on a shrimp boat, like working out on an electrical pole outside there. There are 10 to 15 jobs that are extremely dangerous. I think men have to be willing to give up some of the power. They have to be willing to say, I'm willing to share some of these good jobs with other families. Because in Seattle, the starting pay for a police officer is $64,000, and on average, most officers get an opportunity to do overtime, where they cover funerals, crossings, construction sites. We have 20 construction sites going up in any time downtown Seattle. So police cover, man and women, male and female, cover those sites. So these are really good jobs. I think that women have to want to get into this business and not be deterred by men saying, this is a dangerous job. I think it's about service. It's about serving others, loving other people unconditionally, and not being afraid. This police work is basically a service job, similar to the person that works over at Sears. You're responding to service to numbers 24/7. It's a service job. It's the only department or agency in government that's open 24 hours a day. So I think this should be a place where women are welcomed in. What we've learned from women in policing is they're able to de-escalate easier than men. Men go to testosterone pretty quickly. You see a guy, I'm tough. I'm gonna get in here and get control of this thing. For those people, two guys that are talking there, talk to me. Talk to me. Raise some questions. Okay? I see. You're talking to each other. Talk to me. What's going on? What, you got some questions back there? You guys interested in going into policing? Do you feel like you're qualified to go into it? Huh? Why do you think men are attracted to police work? Did you say power? What else? Come on, give me a couple. You're in college. I'm not your teacher. Come on, give me a couple. The uniform. What about driving a car fast? Guns. Ooh, what else? Good pay. Great benefits. You ever hear police officers getting laid off? We're going to lay 50 police officers off next Friday. You ever hear that happening? Doesn't happen. Pardon? That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so my question kind of goes on to that. So to younger women trying to get into doing things like that. I hear a lot of speakers and a lot of people talk about, say things that you said, and kind of talk on the different dynamics of that, of women working in law enforcement. But, we talked a little bit about how we can fix the problems of the community and law enforcement as a whole. So how do we, and you might not have all the answers to this, but what are your thoughts on how we can fix that, the problem with women in law enforcement, the problem that the problems that they face with working in law enforcement?
I think one of the major problems is exams to get into policing. One of the major things is, how do you find an entree into policing? And usually it's who you know. People tell other people, hey, you should apply for these jobs. We have a grand opening. They are hiring 25 people for jobs. I don't know if individuals in this room know, it takes about $100,000 to take a person from day one through 1 year of training. $100,000 investment from civilian clothing all the way through to that uniform. It's an expensive enterprise. So you want people that want to be in this. Today, I tried to focus on our community seem to be divided between people that want good law enforcement, good police officers, and people on the other hand that want good social justice. Many of the problems in our community are not police jobs, problems in themselves. Police are called upon to police and manage issues not of their making. Police do not have jobs, number one, rather obvious. They do not have any magic wand to end homelessness. They do not own mental health institutions. They do not own schools. They do not have influence into the major social issues in our community. They can only patrol gangs and gangs violence in our community. But these are social problems. And I would say to you, because of social inequality in our society, these problems are magnified. And police are called upon to what? Control those problems. Minneapolis, we have what? 3 sports teams, major sports teams. A basketball team where players make $15 to $20 million a year. We've got baseball players making $15 to $20 million a year. Football players, baseball players, and basketball players. We've got huge teams. These places are monstrosities in our cities. Somebody has been moved over for those facilities to be downtown. And I suggested this morning for Mom, Dad, little Timmy, and Susie to go to a baseball game. They're probably going to have to spend $250 to $300. And if there are 180 games, and there are 35, 40 games before the All-Star game, you're going to have to be making some money to take little Susie and Timmy for parking, the cheeseburger, the cheese fritters, whatever. The beer is $8 to $10. So sometimes I see some people drinking some beer here. Well, go to a football game. Go to a football game, the Seahawks in Seattle. Extremely expensive. So we live in a city, the tale of two cities. These are the best of times. We've got technology. We've got all this good stuff. Technology is up here. Social relationships are like this. So, I can make a phone call to Europe right now. Hi there. I'm in Minnesota. How are you doing? We have unmanned spacecraft that have gone to the moon, but our social relationships are poor. I would like to know from you, what can we do to improve these relationships? I'm just one guy from Seattle. I love everybody. Ooh, there's something wrong with me, right? How can we improve these relationships? I noticed there are no officers in here. I went to a concert in Canada for 2 or 3 days, and I said to somebody in Vancouver, I said, I haven't seen any police in 3 days. They said, we don't need them. We self-police really well around here. Okay? Is it possible for us to self-police on this campus and in our communities? Hey, how are you? We see somebody beating the snot out of somebody. Stop it, Bob. Don't do that. That's not a nice thing to do. And somebody else will say, call the cops. And the police come in there, what? Pop, pop. Many of these problems we can solve ourselves, folks. There's no difference between you and a police officer, with the exception that they are getting paid. We can do some of these things in our community. We can join with the homeless. I'm on a board to help homeless people help other homeless people. Okay? We serve 150 to 200 meals per week. You can become part of the solution to the problem. Don't farm it out to other people and say the police are responsible for all of these problems. No, you're responsible for all these problems as a citizen. So what I want to do is enlist people in the movement. Volunteer in service to America. Huh? Vista. Join the movement for social change in your own community. Be the change that you want from other people. Don't blame the police or blame somebody else. Take some responsibility yourself and say, I want to be part of the solution. You don't have to be a police officer to do this. You don't have to be a social worker to do it. All you have to do is be a concerned citizen that care about other people. And I'm suggesting that the fear is extremely high and you have no real reason to be fearful of stuff. I took a trip to London and Paris a year or so ago. I'm on Facebook and people are writing me notes. Be safe. Don't, watch out for those terrorists over there. Like, get out of here. And then I'm riding a bus, a double-decker in London. I'm thinking, ooh, people from Mississippi say, look out. Looking out for a terrorist. As my son said, ooh, he looks like a terrorist. Ooh. What does a terrorist look like? Ooh, he's got a handkerchief over his head. Ooh. So the fear is high. But we need education to be truly caring about other people. Mother Teresa says the number one problem in the world is selfishness. Me, myself, and I. Not terrorism, selfishness. What am I going to have for dinner? What am I going to have for breakfast? How am I going to take care of myself? Reach out until it hurts. Reach out to your neighbor in this room. Come on, reach out. Touch somebody. It's okay. They're not going to bite you. Hey there, brother. How you doing? How the family and the kids? How you doing? What you eat for breakfast? My suggestion is people reach out, and they reach out and say something bad happens, and then they don't reach out again. Ooh, something bad happened. I don't trust anybody around here. Get a grip.
Okay, so based on what you're saying about fear, do you think that Black people are unjustified in their fear of the police and for their lives? Because that almost sounds like what you're saying.
No, that's not. I'm talking about generally in society.
Okay. And then based on the African American community's relationship with the police, what status does a Black police officer have in the African American community? Are they respected? Are they not?
Boy, these questions are complicated. Where's my PhD dissertation? For many, I'm not able to speak for Black people. All I'm going to say is that for historically it's been that the African American police has not been wholesalely accepted in the Black community. And when some African American police have went over in the white community, they haven't been wholesalely accepted over there. But the same exists for women. You hear people say, I called for a police officer. I didn't want that woman. You know what I mean? So what do you want to do here, pal? We got a problem. There's a problem solver here. Only a few police officers are involved in all of these problems. African Americans that have not been able to move to the suburbs, that are stuck in these big cities, high crime, low income neighborhoods, they want good policing. East Baltimore, some of these places, Ferguson, St. Louis, Missouri, Detroit, Chicago, police, I think they really want to make a difference. Again, the problems are social and they're systemic. The guns that come in Chicago are coming in from 2 or 3 states around there. You have high level of self-hate. You've got a structural problem of poor schools and handy guns and people hating on each other. And then you see somebody saying, well, I done took that guy's drugs, or I done took his girlfriend, or he took my rap tunes. And it's like, what? I'm gonna go down and vamp on him. And then there's shootings and there's other shootings. But I would suggest that Black Lives Matter serves a good function. I know that there are young whites in Black Lives Matter movement. There are all kinds of people in Black Lives Matter movement. What they are doing is saying, we don't hate the police, we want good policing. And if people can walk away from here from anything I'm saying today, is some of my best friends are cops. A big dude, a friend of mine, Carlos. He's a lovely guy. When he's with officers and they go rogue on him, he's like, look, you're on your own, pal. You know, throwing people's ID back to him. He's like, look, I want my retirement check. Don't mess up my retirement check. So African Americans, because of traditional unions, have formed their own unions where they talk about how they can give back and make a difference in the community. Those are the people that invite me over to speak. Those are the people I chat with that want to make a difference in these communities. And I think there's been some inroads. I just think the shootings take us back. Every time there's a shooting, it takes us back. Hopefully, it helps build communities in places like where your brother is the mayor, where people come to support each other in the churches, the schools, and the like. These problems are extremely complicated. They are historical in nature. They're not going to go away. But I think quality education and opportunities will make a difference. Yes. I'm going to take 2 more questions and see if we can get somebody involved here.
Okay.
Get some people involved. Yes.
So, kind of a moving forward question.
Yes.
Right. So how do we as, young people on this campus in the community that we go to school in, how do we try to get this community policing on roll from our end?
Yes. I visited Michigan State a couple of years ago, and the campus was divided into 4 sections. There were the dorms, the fraternities, there was commuter people that were coming into campus. And what they were trying to do is have officers pro-social, talking to people, getting to know people, not coming out when there was an incident, but proactive policing. And I think that's the core of all of this, is rather than reactive policing, is more proactive policing. And I think community people have a role to play in that. If it's proactive, that means we're alerting people. There are phones all over the place. There are support systems all over the place. If there are problems on campus, we call in, we support each other. I think you can get involved by being informed, by being educated. When you go back to your neighborhood, educate people about what you're learning here on campus. That we don't have to be reactive and chase those 911 calls. Those 911 calls are an epidemic of domestic violence in our homes. Most of those calls, from 50 to 60% of the calls in many police departments, are domestic violence calls. So when you hear people say, well, I'm tough, I want to be tough on those street people. Well, the tough place to be tough is trying to come up with solutions to solving calls to homes where there are domestic violence. And what's going on in those homes? Anybody want to tell me what's going on in the homes where there are domestic violence? What do you think creates this problem? Anybody got any idea? Calls to homes. Why do you think those calls are made to homes? Why do you think police are called to these 911 calls of domestic violence? What precipitates this 911 call to, you got any idea? What, Faz? Pardon? Number one, right on, A, Apple. Financial pressures. Parenting conflicts. Okay? Parenting conflicts. Financial conflicts. Roles. Who should be playing what role in the family? Just mismatch. I love you, but I don't like your behavior, right? Alcohol, drugs. But I think a lot of it's driven by financial. What we've observed is driven by financial. Where people should be coming to each other, they're fighting each other. And when the police show up, what happens? Somebody jumps on the back of the police officer. So for the most dangerous place for the police officer to be is inside somebody's home. We had a shooting in Seattle where a woman was pregnant. They'd been called to the home several times. This time the woman went psychotic or whatever and pulled out 2 butcher knives and was shot 7 times. Pregnant woman, 3 kids watched her get shot. I once would respond when called by the press to say things about these kind of shootings. I'm out of that business. I want you guys to get involved. I don't want to be involved anymore. And when I was getting involved, my name is Wilson Edward Reed. They would misspell my name on the nightly news and give me 2 seconds. Willie Reed or something. Like, oh, God. So I'm out of it. I want you to get involved in explaining this to the press, explaining it to people. But I think you should get involved. Don't be afraid of the Black Lives Matter t-shirt. You want good policing. There was a woman killed here in this area, right? She wasn't in a poor neighborhood. She banged on the police car and was shot. So this could happen to anybody in this room. I want you to know this. This could happen. You could be a statistic. So good policing is good for us all. You know, we should all be involved, not just because it's happening to black people and people of color. Yes.
Okay, so to start off with being involved, we have an audience question that asks, what is some literature you suggest to read, especially about racism and topics related to it?
Oh, where do you want me to start? There's a great book called Cops in the Hood by Peter Moscas, a Harvard young man that decides he wants to be a police officer for 2 years and ride along in the community in East Baltimore and learn about policing. Some people tried to dissuade him and say, son, you don't want to do this. You want to step down now. Well, he decided to go ahead and do it, and he actually wrote his dissertation on a book called Cop in the Hood by Peter Moscas, M-O-S-K-O-S. Wonderful book. This is the age of mass incarceration, so Michelle Alexander's book on mass incarceration is a wonderful book. But start with Peter Moscas, Cop in the Hood, mass incarceration book. What's the title of that book? The New Jim Crow. So those are some books to educate yourself. What I've used for years is Their Eyes Were Watching God. What else? Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. To Kill a Mockingbird. Many of those themes are still with us today. I mean, people in the room have read To Kill a Mockingbird. Tom is right here in our society today. He didn't go away. The woman, Mayella, she's got problems. Her dad is beating on her. You see, domestic violence? It seemed like it was 100 years ago, right? So, who else? What are the other books? Any of the Cornell West stuff. The professor up at Berea College has written, what is her name? That wrote for years with Cornell West. I think there's some good literature out there, and if you would like, I would give some suggestions to Dr. Lindstrom. Other questions? There's a question right here in front of me.
For me?
In a piece of paper. I see somebody.
It's written on the book, so you know it.
Oh, okay. What else are people thinking? I won't be coming back soon. Raise all the questions right now. Yes.
What role do you think that like school police officers can play in community policing?
What role?
School police officers.
School police officers. Interesting. Oh boy, what do we call those officers? Resource officers, don't we? That's a really interesting question. I think it's a proactive one. They should work closely with the assistant principal, you know, in terms of reducing fear on the campus, working closely with groups in the school, not just calling the police department, but working there as true resource officers. That's a great question. I have several friends that have been resource officers, and they said they just love working with students. And students remember them when they would see them out in the streets and say, "Oh, hi, officer, how are you doing?" Has anybody went to a school where there was a school resource officer? How did that go? How was that experience for you at the school?
Oh, I loved ours.
Oh.
Yeah, he did a very good job interacting with the students.
Okay.
But I'm sad because I can't name a single security officer on this campus. I don't know any of their names.
Okay, but you see them around.
Yeah.
I have not seen one here on campus since I've been here. Maybe that's a good thing. Anybody else? Yes.
How do you think that our popular culture today plays into racial tension?
I'll use our president, one of his words, greatly, bigly. Okay. I'll get serious now. The movies project a series of stereotypes, you know, of people on both sides or all these different sides, that people are out of control. I mean, you know, it's Samuel L. Jackson or it's whoever, not Morgan Freeman, but you see these images of people that play these roles out, and you start thinking, oh, all these people are that way. You know, and it stereotypes all of us. I think the stereotyping, we come to see some of this, and some of this stuff is self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? So I think the media plays some parts in it. If it bleeds, it leads. Much of what's in the media is about selling products to people. I don't know if anybody ever watched a football game. I've had students count the number of commercials they've seen during a football game. Anybody ever counted the number of commercials? It's 35 to 40 commercials during a football game or more. So the idea here is to bring you to a product. You need a car, you need some insurance, and you need some new deodorant, right? So all of this stuff is about bringing you to a product, right? And I don't know if some media seems to inform, but it's all over the place. There's television, there's radio, there's blogs, there's Facebook, there's Twitter. You don't know what to think sometimes. You're like, oh, this is the truth. Oh, no, this is the truth. What is the truth? You have to find it within yourself. But I think the media, I mean, we were in Vegas for 2 weeks and then we left. Now we still don't know what happened. But we know there were a lot of guns there, and there was one man that was evil. Was he a terrorist? No, he was evil. Yes.
How much do you blame the justice system for police accountability?
Pardon?
How much do you blame the justice system for police accountability?
For police behavior?
Accountability, yeah, or like being prosecuted or not being prosecuted.
Wow. Blame is a big word. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. What role, I guess?
Yeah. What we're talking about here when we talk about the justice system, and it has 3 or 4 parts: crime, what we know of as crime, which is activity that fits into these 6 or 7 categories. You know, most crime is routine. Most people are not out burning down stuff. Most people are not committing murder every night. Most of what's happening is people are leaving their cars unlocked, or people breaking into cars. I would think people breaking into cars is number one in most cities, right? Domestic violence, as I've indicated. The justice system is made up cops, courts, corrections, systems. It's a systems. It's a set of systems. By and large, the media is at the front of it. Politicians run on criminal issues, subtly or overtly, at the local level, at the state level, and the national level. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's reactionary. So that's a big one. There are 800 criminal justice programs out there. I guarantee you there's an answer. But the system in itself is computerized now. So we should know a lot about a lot of stuff. In that pre-sentence report should be understandable. People's behavior should be understandable. We visited the prison. What was the number one crime people were in there for? Yeah, drugs. So, drugs, not murder, not arson, not strong arm robbery. Seattle, I think the number one crime is stolen cars. And it's, my friends would say, get out of the car, take your keys with you and lock the car. Sometimes people just walk up on cars that are running. So they get in there and say, ooh, nice car, I think I'll go for a ride. And take the car to the other side of town and get out. Free car. So the media, the criminal justice system itself has been highly privatized. We talked about the privatization of private prisons. That's a major problem. The militarization of police, in my earlier presentation, I saw as a major problem. That officers live outside the community, they don't live inside the community, they are distant. That once upon a time, most people knew they were a police officer, like you knew people at your high school. Now it's larger, it's more informal. Okay, how are we doing? We must be. Ooh.
Yeah, we're good on time. So thank you, everyone, for coming and participating. That was a really good discussion. If we could thank our guests.
Okay.
Dr. Reed will be around for the rest of the week, if I'm not
They'll be around until Thursday morning.
Until
I'll be
Thursday
around
morning.
until pre-snow.
Okay. So
I'm
please, join him. We have a number of meals that you can join him at, a couple more events. Feel free to check out the McCarthy Center, and we'd love to help you get involved.
Okay, if you have a question, you can come up for a few minutes. That if I didn't answer your question, could I have these? If somebody want to chat for a few minutes or something to that effect. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, everyone. The next Politics in a Pint is on human gene editing on November 2nd. We look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you.